Yeah, well, let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm David Cooks, and I tell you what, we know that paralysis can take on many forms. It can be physical, like mine. It can
do anything you put your mind to.
And what we try to do is feature stories that go from difficult places to fulfilling purpose.
What seems impossible can be done by you.
She's an advocate for people with disabilities. She really wants to live the life that she has imagined and be the best version of herself.
May knock you down, but don't let it stop you.
Annie Homsy-Harris, welcome to the podcast.
So it really wasn't like a dramatic change. It was more like, okay, we have an answer now. How do we deal with it? In my larger family, there was definitely some people who were like, well, okay, it's a little weird. That explains some stuff. It's just a phase. She'll get over it. And it took educating my family that no, this isn't a phase. This is something that I deal with. I've dealt with my entire life. Now we have an answer as to why things are certain things are much harder for me. And now we can move forward.
Got so much to give, a lot of life to live. You must go from paralysis to purpose.
Get your pen and paper out.
Yeah.
I'm taking notes.
Paralysis to purpose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. I'm your host, David Cooks, and I say it every time. I love the job that I have because I get to interview some of the most intriguing and inspiring people on the planet. And today is no exception. You're going to be in for a great treat. Annie Homsy-Harris. She's currently a project manager at a financial technology firm here in the Midwest. She's an author. She's an advocate for people with disabilities. She's a mom, and she really wants to live the life that she has imagined and be the best version of herself. And we're going to talk about that and how she utilizes technology to help her make that happen. And so welcome to the podcast, Annie. I'm excited to speak with you today and looking forward to you sharing your story with our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, we talked about the fact that you currently work at a financial technology firm, but you haven't always done that. The thing that I didn't mention in the intro is that you actually began your career as a professional opera singer.
I sure did. Yeah.
And then you transitioned into the finance world. So we've got a lot to talk about, but let's go back and talk about your interest in music and when did that begin for you?
So actually, my love of music kind of started, my mother always likes to say it started when I was 18 months, because according to legend, I didn't learn to speak in the traditional way. I would sing my words. And so that kind of sparked this love of encouraging me to try every instrument that I could. And my grandfather was the first Syrian immigrant to sing with what was the Travelling Metropolitan Opera Company in the 1930s and 40s. And so he used to sing pieces of Aida and Eugene Onegin to get me to go to bed at night when I would visit with him. And I used to try and sing along with my grandfather. He died when I was very young. He died when I was about 9, which was hard. It was the first real death I had experienced. And so my mother then made it her life's mission. She said, we're going to the opera every single Saturday. And I used to joke around about how it was the most expensive nap I would ever take, because I couldn't find that spark in it because I was 9 years old. When I was 12, I saw a performance of Lucia di Lammermoor, and I'll never forget it because there's an aria in Lucia. It's most people understand opera can be very dramatic. There's a lot of death. And this is no exception. It's a very dark opera, but there's a scene where the soprano, she goes crazy and the curtain fell and she's just standing there in this wedding dress, singing this very powerful piece while she is slowly going mad. The character is slowly going mad. And I remember I was 12 years old and I sat up, I watched it, my jaw dropped and I was like, that's it. I have to do this for the rest of my life. And so I started, my mother had put me in choir and I would sing in like children's talent competitions. And she had me trying to work a children's circuit, which I just wasn't interested in until I saw this opera. So that's when I started kind of taking more of the initiative on and following my passions. And I trained privately for quite a number of years and sang in all kinds of different venues around the world. I think my favorite place that I ever sang at, there's two. I sang in an old amphitheater in Syria when I went back to visit family. And I sang at Machu Picchu just for fun. It was just my dad and I, and we were just hanging out. And I was like, oh, why not? I'll just put an aria on. Why not? And so those are my two favorite performance memories. And I loved every second of it.
I want to go back to something you said early, that sure. You started off by singing your words, as legend would have it. When did that change, or was that part of something bigger that you had to deal with? Because that's an interesting thing, that you, instead of speaking your words, you were singing your words. Is there more to that than we talked about? Yeah. So unbeknownst to anybody, learning disabilities are still kind of an unknown. There are pockets, and there's far more information now than there ever was back in the 80s. But, I have something called nonverbal learning disability. And most people think that means I can't verbalize my words. What it means is that I can see all of these details, but generalizing a full thought, very difficult for me. It took a lot of years of learning how to do that and compensating and things like that. And we can talk about the learning disability side in a bit, but my theory and some of my testers' theories were that it was easier for me to get from word to word by having that musicality, by kind of jumping off of them. Because in a piece of sheet music, if you think about it, everything is connected in one line. You can see different words, but everything is connected in one arc. And you have to follow that arc to get to the whole line, to find the emotion of it, to understand it. And so that's why I attribute it to why I could sing before I could talk. Wow. I've never heard of that before. And your explanation makes perfect sense. And that's so interesting when we talk about people and the challenges that everyone faces. Yeah. There are so many challenges that people face that aren't seen. Your challenge, your disability is not a visible one. It's correct. You had not mentioned that. I wouldn't have known it. I mean, I can't see it. Right. But you have lived through that. And so let's just spend a little bit of time on that process of identifying that you had a challenge that you had to deal with, and the process of getting to the place where you are now, being an advocate for people with disabilities.
So I was diagnosed, like I said, when I was 11. And the reason that I was diagnosed is because the school I was at the time said there's something off. And it wasn't because I couldn't pay attention or anything like that. It was that my particular learning disability, we suffer from very extreme frustrations because we can't express ourselves correctly, and we can't read facial expressions or social cues. We don't have that innate ability. So, when it came to interacting with students and my fellow classmates, I didn't understand how to do that. And so I'd get very frustrated and I would lash out. So the teachers pulled my parents aside and said, look, I think you should get her tested. So we did. And out of the diagnosed population, at least the common thought back then was only 0.1% of the diagnosed population get to have what I have. Majority are usually male, so it's very rare for women to carry this. And it comes with a whole slew of different issues. So not only is it processing and not being able to generalize concepts. So if you think about it, when you're doing math, there are two main concepts in algebra: factoring and foiling. Foiling, you're taking everything and putting it back into the mathematical equation. So you see the big general problem. Factoring, you break it down. I could factor like it was nobody's business. That was my thing. I could factor in my head. It was perfect. Foiling, not so much. And so that's a good analogy of what it's like to have nonverbal learning disability. Meant I didn't have many friends as a kid. I vividly remember when I was at my first school, sitting out, and instead of sitting in the cafeteria, I would take my little sad lunch tray and sit in the hallway, because kids didn't want to sit with me. They didn't want to sit with a kid who didn't understand things and who couldn't interact with them. And, kids don't understand these broader concepts. So it took a lot of years to really come to terms with what this meant. And, going to different kinds of specialists like therapy and things like that to dive into what the emotional side of this is, what this really looks like. How do you compensate for something like that? Mm-hmm. And that became kind of like a mission for me. Music was my outlet. Learning disabilities just became my world. And, fortunately, my parents are very much so advocates. And my mother was like, my child is not going to be any different than anybody else. You can do whatever it is that you want to do. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't, but you have to speak up and advocate for yourself. And one of the biggest problems for people with learning disabilities, doesn't matter what you have, is that we are all told on a constant basis, never tell somebody that you have a learning disability. Never reveal this. And that is, to me, the worst advice you can ever give.
You talked about your mom specifically. Do you have siblings at all?
I do. I have an older sister.
And at the time that you were diagnosed, what was the impact of the revelation of your disability on your family? Had they grown used to just kind of doing whatever you guys did, or was this a moment where you guys had to change some things?
I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. That's a good question. I don't remember my sister having any issues. I think in her head, I was just, oh, okay, that's just Annie. That's just part of Annie. And my sister is an amazing attorney here in Illinois. She does a lot of advocacy for families. That's her specialty. My mother, a lot did change because we had to find the right school for someone like me, because the school I was at was not, it didn't have the right tools to really work with someone who had a learning disability. We also had to find different, I don't know how to say it, communities that would help teach tools. And there was a group that I used to go to called Fun Group. And it was literally somebody who would observe you interacting with a bunch of kids and give you tips. And that was the thought process back then. Like, you'll figure out how to do this and compensate for it as time goes on. So it really wasn't like a dramatic change. It was more like, okay, we have an answer now. How do we deal with it? In my larger family, there was definitely some people who were like, well, okay, it's a little weird. That explains some stuff. It's just a phase. She'll get over it, and it took educating my family that no, this isn't a phase. This is something that I deal with. I've dealt with my entire life. Now we have an answer as to why certain things are much harder for me. And now we can move forward. And I think, understanding that piece it's still, because there's a lot of, I come from a very large family, very old school family. So there's still a lot of that kind of old school mentality of, she'll get over it eventually. No, right. You don't. It's part of you.
So you're diagnosed at age 11, and then at age 12, you fall in love with the opera. And you said that music became an outlet for you.
Yes.
In what way? It sounds like you had a good support from your family, your immediate family anyway, and then you had support groups that you went to. Yes. That gave you a community, a sense of belonging, a sense of being a part of something, which many people who have disabilities or any kind of challenges, they are yearning to find a place to fit, yearning for a community. You were able to find some of that. What did music do? What did that do for you?
So musicians tend to be, we are absolute weirdos. We are eccentric, passionate people. I don't know how other people process music, but for me, when I hear something that I love, it has to have the melody. I have to love it. I have to love the words. It has to have a message behind it for me. When I hear a piece like that aria from Lucia, there's like this fire that ignites in my soul. I don't know how else to describe it. And it's like all of a sudden you find this higher level of joy, and nothing else matters. Like, this is your normal. And music became that outlet, because whenever I sang, and I can sing, it was like, oh, I'm home. This is where I'm meant to be. The other stuff is just, okay, I'll get through school. I'll get through all of that. I'll learn how to socialize better. But music is my home. And whether I'm performing on stage or not, that's always the truth.
Let's talk about what you just said. You said whether you're performing on stage or not, it's still the truth that music is your place of destiny.
Yes.
Well, you just said a mouthful there, because sometimes you aren't able to actively be in your calling, but your calling is still there. What became for you the rub? You talked about this was the place of fulfillment, of purpose, of that joy deep down, but eventually you left that.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to that? But because it sounds to me like you still get the same feeling and the same emotion from it, but you had to leave it.
A lot of things went into that. So you can love your calling, as I love how you phrase that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what you need to do. And I had a rocky relationship with my voice teachers at the time, and I had a very good friend who they were professional opera singers, and they were like surrogate grandparents in a lot of ways for me. And so I used to hang out with them. Wonderful people, and they were on the circuit for a very long time. And I saw what they went through with their kids, and they took their kids on tour. They sang opera all over. They sang in musicals. They did all of this. And I remember one day they sat me down at lunch and they said, "Look, Annie, we love you. We love your singing. You can do this. But if you can see yourself being happy doing anything else, do that." I'll never forget that, because opera and the music circuit, it's not just about the music. And that's something I think people don't really understand. It's a lifestyle. With opera, you have to watch what you eat, watch how you speak, watch the tone of your vocal cords. If I woke up in the morning talking, this is low for me. If I woke up in the morning of a performance talking like this, oh my gosh, I'm not going to hit my high notes. I'm going to have a hard time. You have to, limit yourself in a lot of ways. And you have to love not making money, because you don't make money. People see opera or music in general like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. That person has got all of these fancy gowns and these sets and all this stuff. Yeah, you get all that. You get no money.
Wow. Let's talk. Can we talk about that for a moment? Because
yeah.
I think people underestimate the importance of earning not just a living, but a living so that you can be, comfortable and take care of your family and have some extra at the same time. Because the perception that we get for people who are entertainers, we only see those who have made it.
Exactly.
And there's a whole nother 99% that probably fall into the category that you were talking about, that love it, that want to be involved in it, but they just can't seem to make it work. Is that where you were?
Yes. I think, and something that also people don't realize is the extraordinary biases that go into it. So when you're on the audition circuit, for example, you have to fit their criteria. Opera, it's a very versatile art in a lot of ways. And during COVID, it kills me to see the arts that are suffering from it. And all the arts are suffering from it. But it was already on the decline. And I think one of the biggest problems that specifically opera had, because that's the circuit that I worked, is the biases that go into it. So if you go to an audition, and many times they would say to me, well, we would prefer our soprano to be blonde. We would prefer a soprano to be tiny, 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 sex appeal, selling that kind of thing. And I'm like, I'm not going to dye my hair. This is me. And so it became much more about how you look than how you sing. And so a lot of schools, they have, like a farm out method for singers. It's why a lot of singers also develop vocal notes. It's very, very sad. So I call them cookie cutter singers, because you should be trained how your voice reacts. Your voice is going to be different from somebody else's voice, Everybody is unique. So let's train people on what they can do, not what you expect someone to do. For example, there's trilling in opera. Not everyone has the ability to trill, and that's okay. You don't have to trill, but know that and be self-aware of that. Otherwise, you're going to hurt yourself in the long run.
You mentioned self-awareness, and I want to tie this back into also the conversation we were having earlier about your learning disability. What is the role that you believe self-awareness plays in you becoming the best version of yourself and having the amount of success that you were born to have?
I don't believe that any person can achieve what they deem as greatness unless they are humble enough to admit what they don't know. And the only way you can say, I don't know, is if you are self-aware. I see so many times a lot of egos kind of getting trapped in the, no, I need to know everything. You don't. It's okay. You don't need to know everything. And I certainly think that every single day is an opportunity to learn something new. And if I go a day without learning something new, for me, it feels like I've wasted a day. So I think when it comes to talking about success, there's this expectation of what success is. It's a big mansion, lots of money and going to, on your private jet. I don't think that's what success is. Success is individual. Success is, where do you find yourself being happiest? So I can live here in my house. I can live in a condo. I can live in we did live in a very tiny basement. And I was happy because I am fulfilling what I want. I'm doing what I want to do. And that's a real gift. But I can't know that. I can't find that unless I can say, I don't know this. I don't understand that. Let me learn about it. And that takes a level of self-awareness.
This would be a great place for us to take a quick break. And we'll be right back with Annie to talk about what happened with the rest of the opera and how she ended up where she is today. On Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast.
We hope you're enjoying Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Paralysis to Purpose for more updates. Also, check out David's website at davidcookspeaks.com to learn more about his mission and purchase his book, Getting Undressed, From Paralysis to Purpose.
Hey, welcome back to Paralysis to Purpose with our guest, Annie Homsy-Harris. And we dropped off, you were talking about success and what that meant. And obviously you were having some success in opera, but you were talking about some of the challenges that you faced. And eventually you gave it up. Take us down that journey, and then we'll get into what you're doing now as well.
Yeah. So I mentioned I didn't have the best relationship with my voice teachers. It took the love of singing away from me. I gave somebody else the power to do that. Now, and I say it that way specifically because you are the one who are in control of your own emotions. And when you give somebody else that power, that's in a lot of ways, that's a huge mistake. You should never give anyone emotional power over you. And I had. And because of that, I really fell out of love with the performance. I never fell out of love with opera. But I fell out of love with the performance of it. Like, I didn't want to be in a dress and the stage. I didn't want to do it because it wasn't fun anymore. So I remember it vividly. I did my farewell concert on the radio and I walked off the stage and that was it. I never went back. And I ended up working in project management for a few other firms in Illinois. And, I suddenly had health insurance. I suddenly could pay my rent easily. I could afford to do things like go out with my friends. I could drink a cocktail, because when you sing opera, you really shouldn't be drinking alcohol. So for me, it was kind of like this whole freedom opened up. I finally got the tattoo I had always wanted, like crazy stuff, and here I was. I'd been singing for over 10 years at that point. And I suddenly found this whole world was opened up for me, because I wasn't letting somebody else have power over me, and I wasn't letting it dictate my life anymore. And it took a really, really long time to reconcile with that, because there's a lot of feelings of failure and trying to almost fight the sense of purpose and belonging that I had with opera. But after a hiatus, I kind of came to a place where I was like, okay, I can sing again, but I'm going to sing for me now. I don't really want to do it on stage, and I'm good holding off on that for a while. And then last year I was pregnant with my daughter, and I gave a Christmas performance. It was a private studio that I did for my family's church. And, she kept kicking me every time I would sing. And so I was like, okay, here's the joy. My daughter loves it. I'm going to keep doing it. So now she likes to shout with me when I sing. But now, I sing opera all the time at my house, all the time. I'm downstairs rocking Donizetti and Puccini and Mozart and having a great time. But it took me years to emotionally come back to a place where it was okay. And I was the one in the control seat again.
So let's talk about that journey, because I think that's important to let people know it didn't happen overnight, and it took you some time. You talked about how the performance became an issue for you, but not the opera itself. Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy the training aspect of all of this? You talked about giving your emotions over to someone else, which is a mistake. What made it so tough to get your emotions back? I mean, it would sound like since you gave it to him, you can take it back.
Yeah. So, I think it's the hubris of the young. I started the professional part of my life in opera when I was 19. So, I didn't understand what that meant. And I thought this is normal. People can tell you, wow, I never thought you could sound worse. And that was like a normal thing to say to people instead of being an encouraging person. And so, for me, the love and the passion that I had for the art, it almost became compartmentalized in my head, right? Like I could justify taking that kind of hit day after day after day because I loved this so much. And I knew what my goal was. And I was so focused and driven to get to my goal that none of the rest of it mattered, no matter what any of my teachers had said or any of it. So that was how I rationalized it. And I just remember I kept thinking about what my friends had told me, that if you can see yourself being happy doing anything else, do that. And I kept thinking like, well, what else makes me happy? And that's when I started realizing, oh, I don't know. But one thing is not going to define you forever. And that's true whether it's opera or whatever field you're in. And some advice that I give to kids that I mentor is, don't get your heart set on doing just one thing. Be open to doing anything that you become passionate about, that excites you, because you never know where it's going to lead. You just don't. And we trap ourselves in this mindset, well, I've got to go to college. I have to major in this. And if I major in this, then I have to do that. It doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. Maybe for some people it works out that way, but it doesn't work that way. So I gave somebody else the power over me because it was how I could justify getting to where I needed to go. And the last concert I sang, I remember, you're such a perfectionist in the opera world. You have to get every color of the tone right. Every note has to be right, pronounced exactly right. I just remember, I just didn't care. I was singing a duet from Showboat. And I just remember there's a point break. You're supposed to keep your audience on the hit, like, oh, you're going to draw them in. And I just remember my tenor partner looked and was like, "It's your turn. You got to sing. It's your line." And I cracked up laughing because I was like, "Oh, I don't care anymore. Oh, I'm done. You're not going to have the power over me anymore." I sang, I finished, and it was very professional, but that was it. I just remember that was the emotional moment where I'm like, no, I want my emotional power back. And I never let someone take it from me again.
So you leave the opera
Mm-hmm.
and you go into the world of finance.
I did.
That's about as two unrelated fields as one could imagine.
Not really.
Why not?
So finance is very passionate people. They're very passionate about making money. So there's a commonality there. Whatever you do in life, doesn't matter what field you're in, you have to rely on your cues and you have to rely on whoever your duet partner is on this. So in the finance world, if you're an analyst, you have to rely on the deal makers and the lawyers, and they're your partners in all of this. So there's a lot of commonalities. And the other part about finance is it takes thick skin to survive in the financial world, especially as a woman. Mm. So when you've gone through the rigmarole of auditions, somebody is nitpicking every little thing about you, how you look, from how you sound to where you stand, you're so used to getting that kind of critique that whatever anybody says to you, it's kind of an irrelevant. They're like, okay, cool. I'll work on that. No problem. Let's move on. So you develop a very thick skin by singing in the opera. And when you have a learning disability, it ties in even more, because the whole point for us to learn these compensation tools is kind of like a camouflage. Like, we're going to learn how to compensate enough so that you cannot tell that I have a learning disability. There's your performance aspect. And so all of this kind of tied into finance was kind of a good fit.
The opera, the good and the bad, trains you perfectly to fit in the world of finance. So you ended up getting your MBA as well.
I did. Yep. I know. I didn't take the GMATs or the GREs to get it because I refused. I was like, I'm not doing this. The system is so biased against people with learning disabilities. So I lobbied Congress and I lobbied our then President Barack Obama. And I said, here's my story. I won't do this, because what people don't know is that for learning disabled people, when you're under the age of 18, you have to be retested every 3 years in order to qualify under the ADA. That, for those who don't know, it's the Americans for Disabilities Act. And when you're over 18, you have to be retested every 4 years. Otherwise, you don't get any accommodations. And not all insurances cover the testing, and not all insurance-covered testers are good. So you really have to do due diligence. Otherwise, it's about $3,000 to $6,000 out of pocket for a good quality tester, 3 days for 6 hours a day. So I lobbied, and actually I have a letter framed from President Obama, who wrote me the sweetest letter. I love it. About, how we haven't done enough for people with disabilities in this country generally, and how, he's rooting for me. And then Congressman Quigley was like, okay, let's write some legislation. It's like, okay, cool. Let's write a piece of legislation to change this. So that's what I ended up doing. Didn't pass in either the federal or state house. So then he asked me, he said, look, we've been working on this for a year. What do you want to do? I said, I just want to get my degree. So he called the school and they let me in.
What was graduate school like for you? I mean, you're still dealing with the processing issues that you were facing. Mm-hmm. And in graduate school, the amount of material that's coming at you, at least, I got my MBA at Duke, and that first year, especially that first semester, were you drowning ever? Did you ever feel like you weren't going to be able to do it? What did you think?
So I was working full time while I was getting my MBA. And, I guess maybe it's because my parents drilled into me that there is nothing in this world you can't do, but there was never a moment where I felt I couldn't do this. Now, I had a really not so great experience in my undergrad because there was nobody there who would advocate for people with learning disabilities. And I was put into this box where, like, well, we can have somebody read the test to you, or you can just have extended time. And I'm like, well, I don't need somebody to read the questions to me. I know what the question says, and that's not my disability. That's somebody else's disability. And that's great that you can give them that tool. And so I walked into the learning disability head's office and I said, look, I'm back and I'm not messing around. Do not get in my way. I will tell you what I need. This is where I'm at. You either help me or we're going to have a really big problem. And he didn't stand in my way at all. Kudos to him. He was like, oh, she's not messing.
And you were able to clarify and make clear what it is that you needed. And
right.
that goes back to early in our conversation today. That's the opposite of what you were being told. Don't tell anybody, keep it quiet. And if you had done that, just think about what your career would have been like in colleges and graduate school.
Right.
It'd have been terrible. But until you spoke up and said, here's what I need, because people can't respond to what they don't know.
That's right.
Now, their response may not be what you want, but at least they know what they need to respond to. So you got your MBA while you were working full time, and which is great. And you're married now, right?
Yeah, I was. My husband and I we were longtime friends for, I don't know, going on 8 or 9 years now. We've known each other, and about 2.5 years after we had been hanging out, we were friends. He was like, maybe we should go on a date. I'm like, that's a fantastic idea. So he was with me through grad school, and he saw a lot of the chaos, and he saw a lot of, what I got my master's degree in economics and entrepreneurial finance, which are not easy topics. But we had quite a fun time doing projects together, and I would do my presentations for him. Be like, all right, give me the feedback, give me the critique, let's hear it. We got married in 2019, and then we had our daughter last year. Wow.
Congratulations. As you talked about, even though you're not on stage or anything like that now, you still perform. And one of the things that I've talked about in my book was how that the paralysis that I experienced did not paralyze the passion and love I had for the game of basketball. And neither did it paralyze my purpose. I just had to find other ways to get that fulfillment from that thing that I knew I was supposed to do. That sounds a little bit about like what you've done with your singing. Are you thinking about doing anything beyond that? I mean, do you feel like you want to scratch that itch ever?
All the time. I think what I would like to do, COVID is obviously a hindrance. It's really hard to do an opera concert virtually. I don't think people want to put a microphone on their ear and hear me singing in their ear. I was going to say screaming, but singing in their ear will be nice. Especially in like 15 different languages. But I think when things settle down and we're able, my daughter's, hopefully she can get vaccinated and soon, and we can all be in a room without fear of breakthroughs. I would like to do a back to me concert, and it's not going to be traditional opera. It's going to be, I always had this really crazy idea of doing kind of like period pieces. So starting from the 1940s and progressing through, scattering opera that I think is relevant to the time periods in. And then I have some obviously I have quite a few musician friends who want to do a collaboration modern piece that we would perform together. So that's the idea. I hope it happens. I do have a TikTok account where I sing occasionally, and I cook a lot on there, and I talk about what it means to be a mom in COVID. And so that's been a really great outlet. And what I do for a living, I'm performing every single day. you're in a meeting and you got to turn it on. Let's do this. I just don't have to wear a heavy gown, and tons of makeup, which to me is, so happy about that.
What was the most difficult, darkest time for you? And how did you get through that? I know you talked a little bit before we got on today about you almost gave up. There were times when you wanted to quit. What was that moment like? And when was that?
Sure. I was 16 and I'll never forget it. I was always busy doing something. I played tons of sports. I was singing all the time. I was playing the piano. I was, teaching tennis. And I just remember I just didn't want to do it anymore. Every day I had to compensate. Every day I had to figure out how to learn something. And it's not that you learn a tool and then boom, you can magically absorb this information. You have to kind of relearn how to learn every single day with a learning disability. Because every single moment, every single topic, every single everything, it's always different. And so I just stopped. I was so tired of it. And it's exhausting, because you're constantly going through a checklist in your brain, at least for me, of, okay, I have to remember that this is how this will come off if I say this. If I have this reaction, then people will assume this. You have to go through this constant checklist. It's exhausting. So I gave up. I said, no, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to sit. If I'm going to be if the world is going to perceive people with learning disabilities as a bum, then I'm just going to be a bum. Fine. And my GPA in high school went from like 3.5 to 2.7 because I tapped out. And I remember my high school principal sat me down and said, look, you have two options. You can fail. Very easy option. Do nothing, fail. That's fine. Flip burgers, at your family barbecue and, hope that your parents will give you a $5. Fine. Or you can have a really hard time, work your absolute tail off, potentially still fail, but you won't hate yourself at the end of the day. And he looked at me, he's like, they're not pretty options. They're not fun at all. I was like, no.
So that's a great statement. Neither of these options were necessarily appealing to the eye.
No.
But the outcome of the second one,
that's right.
When you said it, it spoke to me. Like you get done with that, and regardless of the outcome, you won't dislike who you are.
That's right.
And that was important. That was important for you, and it's important for anyone, whether they have a learning disability or a physical disability or no disability at all, especially during that time of life. You're diagnosed at 11 and you're a teenager, and that those teenage years are so key. And that sense of worth and belonging is just so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I worked every single day after that. And yep, my GPA didn't do great. It's okay. For anybody listening, it's okay. Your GPA does not dictate your future. No. It's important for school, but after school, it's okay. School ends. But yeah, I fought like crazy. I went to tutoring every day. I did extracurricular activities to get my GPA back up. I did extra tutoring sessions, whatever I could do. And was it hard? Yes. Have there been a lot of tears on this journey? Yes. Am I guaranteeing that there are more tears to come on my journey? For sure. But I wouldn't change a single second of it.
Wow. And that's a great way to live, right? I mean, that's no regret living.
Right.
The one thing that you said I had never considered before, and you said when a person has a learning disability, they're relearning everything every time.
Every time.
That's a daunting task. You're starting over all the time. You're constantly starting over. How then did you begin to gauge your successes or when you had a success or a win in life? How did you do that when you're always starting over?
I don't think I have yet. I'll be honest. I really don't think I have. My husband's always trying to tell me, you're so wonderful. You're so amazing. And I love him so much for every day telling me that, because I do need to hear it. Everybody needs to hear it. And he's such an amazing support. I couldn't do this without him. But when I've done something great, I don't really notice it. I don't stop and go, hey, look what I just did. I keep going and I keep fighting. And that's something that I think I need to work on. I don't think that's necessarily the right way to be. You should stop and give yourself a pat on the back and say kudos for doing this. I think the first time I really ever did it was when I delivered my child and was like, hey, look what I just did. And at the same time, I was, pitching a business idea to my OB-gynecologist while I'm in labor, like, who does that? That's craziness. So I don't think I have found out how to do that. But yes, every day, every conversation, even if it's with an old friend who I've known for 35 years, it's relearning that conversation. It's relearning that person, their language, how you have to interact with them because everybody is different. How to approach projects. Every day it's a do-over. Every day it's the start button.
Before we go, I know you authored a book. Tell us a little bit about the book that you've written.
Oh, yeah. I did this as a fun side project. It was a book. Like I said, my father's side of the family is all from Syria, and I never really knew my mother's side that well because she really embraced the Syrian side. And so for me, it was a treat because I ate really well, and I still do. But I wanted to get to know this family that I had heard all about. I knew my aunt, and some of my cousins, and I knew my uncle, but I didn't really know who we were, And so I had an ancestor who fought for the Union Army in the Civil War, and he had a journal. So I took his journal and I turned the journal into a book, and it's called Grandfather's Civil War Story. It's a little slow at first, but it really gets good. And he was a pacifist, so he never once fired his weapon. And he talked about a lot of the issues of the time of like, how do we reconcile what we've come from? We have this historic dark mark on us for doing the worst, most unthinkable thing that history has ever seen. How do we come back from this? And it's a really interesting to watch him try and embrace what he believed we should be doing against what he was raised with. Wow. So that was the book.
And I encourage the listeners to check it out because it's interesting because it is coming. It's a period piece, and it's in real time. The journal was being made, and your grandfather was struggling with this in his mind of, now that this is over, how do we reconcile? How do we make up for the mistakes of our past? How do we? That's right. And that conversation is still being had today.
Absolutely.
It's still being, which lets you know the complexity of that discussion. That it's not something that should be taken lightly, and that people don't take lightly.
And I think it's something we don't talk about enough.
Right.
We absolutely do not talk about it enough. We don't talk about what we are doing as a society to this day when we marginalize people. It's evil.
There are three things we always talk about on the podcast, and you've touched on some of them. And that's our perspective, our perseverance, and our partnerships. And I'm going to ask you each of those words and what comes to mind in your journey that was important. When I say the word perspective, what comes to mind for you?
I think perspective for me is that self-awareness again. I was just talking actually with a colleague of mine, a very dear friend of mine actually, about perspective. And I've been reading this amazing, it was on President Obama's 2018 to read list. And it was a book on Frederick Douglass. And it's one of the most powerful writings I've ever experienced. And it gives me this perspective of here's somebody who overcame such tremendous odds and what an impact this individual made to the world, and continues to make to this day. And so that perspective of even the smallest thing can make the difference. And that's something like maybe learning how to read, which is where I'm at with that book. But also for me, it's, hey, maybe it's telling somebody else a little bit more about my learning disability. Maybe it's being a little more open about who I am and having that perspective of it's okay. It's okay. Whatever happens, it's going to be okay.
Wow. Perseverance.
That's the never give up, never, ever give up, and never give someone else power over you, ever.
Partnerships.
Partnerships for me means finding people that you don't have to love them, you don't have to trust them, they don't have to be your bosom buddies, but finding people that whatever the case may be, whether they're great to you or terrible to you, learning from that, because you have to work with people. It's unavoidable. So having that emotional partnership with yourself when you work with other people to accept whatever comes and to not be afraid to speak your truth.
It sounds to me like you're committed to growth, and regardless of whatever the situation is that you're in, you're committed to grow. And it's interesting. You can be partners. You can benefit from people who don't treat you well. Just
That's
as
right.
you can benefit from people who do treat you well.
Right.
And so that's a great distinction. Is there anything else that you, in this last 30 seconds to a minute, that you would like to leave with our audience?
I would just like to say that my story is just one small story in the great world that we have out there. So meet people, learn about them. Don't be afraid of what they have to say. Don't be afraid of anybody who is different in any way. They're different. People embrace that. Let's embrace everybody and learn to love each other and listen to each other, because I think the world would be a much better place if we did that.
Absolutely. Well, if people want to follow you on social media, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so I have HOMSEAS 13, Homseas 13 is my handle on Instagram. I also have a food blog, foodienomial.com, where I talk about restaurants I've eaten, recipes I've cooked, just crazy thoughts.
Continued success to you as you move on your journey from paralysis to purpose. And until next time, this is David Cooks reminding you that your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure.
You can do anything you put your mind to.
Thanks for tuning in to Paralysis to Purpose. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paralysis to Purpose on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. To purchase his book, visit davidcookspeaks.com. Be sure to tune in next time for more inspiring conversations with David Cooks.
When I was younger and I took jobs that I turned out not to like, I always thought that the problem was me and that what I needed to do was just man up and just learn to like whatever it was I was doing.
Next time on Paralysis to Purpose.
Nate Johnson is a former prosecutor. He left that career to begin to work with some of the people that he had been prosecuting.
And so that's what I tried to do with law, where I had my own practice for a while. I was in-house counsel for that same PR firm for a while, worked for a judge. And then when I didn't like any of that, I thought, well, maybe I could go and be a prosecutor and maybe I could be the prosecutor who tries to send people to treatment for their mental health issues or for addiction rather than to jail.
Paralysis to purpose.